All right, diving right in. We've got a fascinating topic for our deep dive today. It's all about parental alienation.
Oh, that's a tough one. It's something we hear a lot about these days.
Yeah, definitely a topic that hits home for many. Actually, a listener sent us this blog post. It's called Parental Alienation Explained: Signs, Effects, and How to Seek Help.
Okay.
And it's by Pastor Eli Williams. Now, he's a fatherhood practitioner
Mhm.
and even wrote a book about fatherhood.
Oh, wow.
So, he's coming at this from that perspective.
Yeah, makes sense.
But we want to make it clear. Parental alienation, it's not just a father's issue. Mothers can experience this too. It really can impact anyone.
Absolutely.
And that's why we're here today, to really unpack all of this. And we have our expert on family dynamics joining us.
It's great to be here. Definitely happy to, shed some light on this complex topic.
Perfect. So, first things first, what exactly is parental alienation? I mean, we hear the term thrown around a lot, but what does it actually look like in real life?
Well, you're right. It is complex. But at its core, it's about one parent really using, manipulative tactics to damage the child's relationship with the other parent. And it's not just like regular disagreements.
Right. It's not just parents like bickering or disagreeing on things. It's a whole other level.
Exactly. It goes way beyond that. Think of it as like a systematic attempt to almost turn a child against their other parent.
Wow. And Pastor Williams, in his blog post, he gets some pretty concrete examples, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. He talks about, bad mouthing the other parent, maybe spreading lies or exaggerating
Oh,
flaws.
that's awful.
Yeah, and then there's restricting contact. So the alienating parent is actually limiting the child's chances to even see the other parent.
And one that really struck me, he called it creating a false narrative, like almost rewriting history, making the targeted parent seem unfit or even abusive. That's got to be incredibly damaging, right? Especially for a young mind still trying to figure out the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Kids, they're so impressionable. And when they're constantly hearing negative things, about one parent, it really distorts their view. And the long-term effects of that manipulation, they can be really tough.
Really tough. And I noticed the blog post also mentioned how hard it is to pin down exact numbers when it comes to how common parental alienation is.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. There's so many reasons for that. It often goes unreported, and there's not always a clear, like, universal definition.
Right. Like what even counts as parental alienation versus, something else?
Exactly, and the severity can vary so much. Sometimes it's subtle, other times it's full-on, indoctrination.
Wow.
But even with all that, research suggests, maybe 10% to 25% of high conflict custody cases could involve it.
Okay, so a big range, but even at the low end, that's potentially millions of people in the US alone dealing with this.
Absolutely, it's huge.
Yeah.
And that's exactly why it's so important to talk about it, to help people understand the signs, the impact, the whole picture.
Definitely. And speaking of understanding better, there was this study from 1991, Cloire and Rivlin, that caught my eye. They looked at 1,000 custody cases, and I was shocked. 86% involved some degree of, they called it parental programming and brainwashing.
Yeah, that study gets a lot of attention. But, keep in mind, it was over 30 years ago. Research has come a long way since then.
Oh, so it's kind of like a piece of the puzzle, but maybe not the whole picture anymore.
Right, exactly. It's a starting point. But we've learned so much more about the nuances of parental alienation since then. And that leads us to recognizing the signs. Because if we want to address it, got to know what to look for, right?
Absolutely. So let's say someone's listening and they're starting to worry that, hey, maybe this is happening in their family or someone they know. What are some red flags, some things to really pay attention to?
Well, the blog post divides it into two main categories: changes in the child's behavior, specifically towards the targeted parent,
Yeah, okay.
and then changes in the child's overall behavior, just in general.
Got it. So let's start with the targeted parent. What kind of changes should raise a red flag there?
The biggest one is that shift in the child's attitude. Like all of a sudden, they're hostile, rejecting the parent completely.
Oh, wow.
They might become dismissive, even verbally abusive, refusing to see the parent altogether. And their reasons for this, they're usually weak, flimsy, or they just don't make sense. Like they can't really explain why they suddenly hate this parent.
Oh, that's heartbreaking. Because normally, even when there's family conflict, kids still have mixed feelings, right?
Yeah.
But here, it's like all the good memories, the positive stuff, it's just wiped out.
Exactly. And that's what we call lack of ambivalence. It's the hallmark of parental alienation. Because ambivalence, having those mixed feelings, It's natural in any relationship, especially family. So when a child shows none of that, it's a sign something's seriously wrong.
It's like their perception of the parent has been completely manipulated.
Exactly.
Now, you mentioned changes in the child's overall behavior too. What should people look for there?
Well, parental alienation, it doesn't just affect that one relationship, it can impact their whole life. So you might see increased anxiety, depression, trouble trusting people, even their grades might drop suddenly.
It's almost like this ripple effect impacting all areas of their life.
Right, exactly.
But I imagine it can be tough to tell, right? Because some of those changes could just be normal teenage stuff, stress, hormones, all that.
Oh, for sure. That's why you gotta look at the bigger picture, the context. Are these changes happening alongside that shift in their attitude toward one parent?
Right.
And is the other parent, are they encouraging that negative view?
Yeah.
That's when it becomes much more likely it's parental alienation.
So it's really about connecting the dots, seeing the patterns.
Exactly. And these are just some signs, right? Parental alienation, it can show up in so many ways.
Right.
So if you're at all concerned, the best thing is to talk to a professional. Get that guidance.
That's good advice. Better safe than sorry, especially with something this serious.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Because early intervention, that's key. It can make a world of difference in preventing long-term harm to that child and their relationship with the parent.
And so what can someone do if they're seeing these red flags and they think, okay, this is it. This is parental alienation. What are the steps they should take?
Well, one of the first things Pastor Williams talks about is documentation.
You mean like keeping records of what's going on?
Exactly, like a detailed journal of interactions, incidents, anything that seems relevant, especially if, legal stuff comes up.
So we're talking emails, texts, voicemails, anytime the other parent interferes with parenting time, bad-mouthing in front of the kid.
All of it. It's about having that paper trail to protect yourself and your child.
That makes sense. And he also stressed getting professional help. So who are the key people someone should reach out to if they suspect this is happening?
Well, first and foremost, a therapist. You want someone who specializes in family dynamics and parental alienation specifically.
So a therapist is like the foundation.
Right. They can offer guidance, support, and help you and your child figure out how to rebuild that relationship. And then, depending on the situation, you might need legal advice too.
So a family lawyer who knows about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, someone experienced in parental alienation cases. They can guide you through the legal steps, protecting your rights and your child's best interests.
So it's like building a team of experts to navigate this really complex situation.
Exactly. Because parental alienation, it's multifaceted. It needs a multidisciplinary approach to really tackle it effectively.
And while all this is happening, working with the experts, the blog post also talked about keeping communication open with your child. But how do you even do that when they've been basically programmed to reject you?
It's tough, no doubt. But focus on positive interactions whenever you're together. And just as important, don't criticize the other parent in front of them.
I can only imagine how hard that must be. You're hurting, you're angry, but you have to hold back.
It takes work, definitely. And therapy can help with that, learning how to manage those big emotions, finding healthier ways to cope. Because remember, the goal is that relationship with your child. And that starts with creating a safe and positive space for them.
And that means separating them from the other parent's alienating behavior.
Exactly. It's showing them you love and support them no matter how they're acting towards you at that moment.
The blog post also talked about limiting conflict with the other parent, which seems counterintuitive given how high conflict these situations usually are.
It does.
Yeah.
But getting into arguments, especially in front of the child, that just escalates things. It's not about letting them walk all over you. It's being smart, picking your battles.
So how do you limit conflict but still stand up for yourself, for your rights as a parent?
Keep communication minimal. Focus only on things that directly impact your child's well-being. And be calm, respectful, no matter what.
It's like modeling good communication for your child, even when it's really tough.
Right. Showing them disagreements can be handled maturely, respectfully.
And that ties into another point Pastor Williams made. Patience and persistence. Rebuilding these relationships, it takes time.
It's a long game, definitely. It can be so frustrating, draining. Some days you feel like you're moving forward, then bam, 2 steps back.
Right.
But celebrate the small wins, every positive interaction, every connection you make, it's a step in the right direction.
That's a good point. And speaking of steps in the right direction, I wanted to touch on something Pastor Williams brought up, given his background, the importance of prayer.
Yeah, that's a personal one. But I think the broader idea, whether you're religious or not, is about finding that support, that strength from something bigger than yourself. Whether it's traditional prayer, meditation, connecting with nature, whatever works for you.
Right, finding that peace and hope even when things feel chaotic.
Exactly. Because nurturing your spiritual well-being, whatever form it takes, can be so important in dealing with the emotional toll of all this.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good place to pause for now. We've covered a lot of ground already, but there's still so much more to explore.
Yeah, we've just scratched the surface, really.
So stay tuned, listeners. We'll be back in a moment to dive even deeper into the long-term impacts of parental alienation and what healing and recovery can look like.
Before we move on, I think we should circle back to something we touched on earlier, the long-term impact of all this, especially on the kids.
Yeah, that's a great point. We talked about the immediate effects, like the emotional stuff. But what about later on when these kids become adults? What kind of baggage are they carrying?
Well, the damage, it can run deep. These are individuals who might have trouble trusting people, forming close relationships. They might struggle with setting boundaries, or, and this is tough, they might even end up repeating the cycle of alienation with their own kids.
It's like this painful legacy that gets passed down, generational trauma almost.
Exactly, and that's why early intervention is so crucial. The sooner we address this, the sooner these kids can get the help they need, the better chance they have of breaking free from that cycle.
Mm.
And that brings us back to what Pastor Williams was saying about patience and persistence.
Right, about how rebuilding these relationships, it's a long road.
Oh, absolutely. It requires so much understanding, compassion from the targeted parent. They have to be there for that child consistently, even when it's hard, even when they're being pushed away.
It's almost like the ultimate test of unconditional love. No matter what the child says or does, that love is still there.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it. It's showing that child, hey, despite everything you've been told, my love for you is unwavering.
This makes me think about forgiveness. Can you truly move on from something like this, both the parent and the child, without forgiveness?
Forgiveness, that's a big one, and it's a different journey for everyone involved. But it's important to remember, forgiveness doesn't mean saying what happened was okay.
Right, it's not about condoning the behavior.
Exactly. It's about letting go of the anger, the resentment, so you can start to heal.
So it's more about finding a way to move forward without those negative emotions holding you back.
Right, because holding on to anger and bitterness, that just hurts you in the long run. Forgiving, it's about freeing yourself from that, prioritizing your well-being, and ultimately the well-being of your child, too.
It takes a lot of strength to reach that point, especially when you've been so deeply hurt.
It does. And it's not something you have to do alone. Therapy can be incredibly helpful in that process, working through those complex emotions.
That makes sense. And earlier we were talking about professional guidance, coping mechanisms, and Pastor Williams mentioned the spiritual aspect, the power of prayer.
Yeah, and even if you're not religious, I think the idea of finding comfort and strength from something bigger than yourself, whatever that looks like for you, it can be really helpful.
Yeah, like finding those practices that bring a sense of peace and hope, even in the midst of all the chaos, whether it's traditional prayer, meditation, nature, whatever resonates with you.
It's about finding what grounds you, helps you tap into that inner strength and resilience.
So as we're talking about healing, resilience, what are some practical things families can do to start repairing the damage done by parental alienation?
Well, professional help, that's always the first step. A therapist who specializes in this, they can work with both the parent and the child, address those underlying issues, rebuild that trust, that communication.
And what about the legal side of things? What can targeted parents do to protect themselves, make sure their child's rights are protected?
That's where a family lawyer comes in, someone who understands parental alienation. They can help you navigate the legal system, make sure you're taking the right steps.
So it's back to that team of experts we talked about. The therapist, the lawyer, anyone else who can provide specialized support.
Exactly. Parental alienation, it's a complex problem. It needs a comprehensive solution.
So what would a therapist do specifically to help a child who's been through this?
One of the most important things is to help that child understand it's not their fault. Kids, they often internalize the negativity. They feel guilty, like they caused the problem.
So helping them separate themselves from the conflict is key.
Absolutely. The therapist will also help them challenge the stories they've been told about the targeted parent, to question those narratives, remember their own experiences, the good times.
I bet that's tough, especially if the kid is resistant, defensive.
It can be, definitely. It takes a lot of patience, empathy, understanding how kids think and how parental alienation works.
And what about the targeted parent? How can therapy support them through all of this?
Therapy can give them a safe space to process their emotions, learn how to cope with the alienation, and how to communicate with their child in a way that builds connection, not conflict.
So it's about staying connected even when it feels impossible.
Exactly. Holding on to hope, continuing to show up for your child, even when they're pushing you away.
That takes incredible strength.
It does. It really does. It speaks to the power of that parent-child bond.
We've been focusing on the targeted parent and the child, but what about the alienating parent? Is there a role for therapy in addressing their behavior?
There should be. If they're willing to participate, therapy can help them understand why they're doing this. Maybe they have their own unresolved issues, or they're using the child to cope with their own emotional baggage.
So it's about getting to the root of the problem, helping them see the harm they're causing.
Right. Promoting self-awareness, accountability, and ultimately giving them the tools to make different choices.
So while this is a tough topic, it sounds like it's not a hopeless one. With the right support, families can heal, they can find a way back to each other.
Absolutely. It's about acknowledging the damage, seeking help, and committing to that long journey of rebuilding trust and connection.
And something Pastor Williams said really resonated with me. It's about the targeted parent taking care of themselves. He said it's not selfish, it's essential.
He's right. It's so easy to forget about your own needs when you're in the middle of all this. But you can't pour from an empty cup, right?
So finding those things that bring you joy, that help you recharge, whether it's hobbies, nature, spending time with friends, whatever works for you.
Exactly. Self-care is not a luxury, it's a necessity. It gives you the strength to face this, to be the best parent you can be.
And speaking of being a good parent, the blog post had some good tips on how to maintain a positive relationship with your child, even when they're being alienated from you.
Yeah, he talked about focusing on quality time, not quantity.
So even if you only get limited time with your child, make those moments count.
Right. Engage in activities they enjoy. Really listen to them. Show them that unconditional love.
Be that steady, reliable presence in their life, no matter what the other parent is doing.
Exactly. Consistency is so important. Kids need to know they can count on you.
And what about those tough conversations when your child repeats those negative things they've heard about you? How do you handle that?
Stay calm. Don't get defensive. Instead of arguing, validate their feelings. Let them know it's okay to have different perspectives.
So instead of, that's not true, or they're lying, you might say something like, I understand why you might feel that way, but I want you to know I love you and I'm always here for you.
Exactly. Reassurance without getting sucked into the negativity.
And sometimes the best thing is just to listen.
Absolutely. Sometimes they just need to vent, to express themselves without judgment.
So it's a balancing act, validating their feelings while also setting boundaries.
That's a good way to put it. You can acknowledge their feelings without tolerating disrespectful behavior.
It sounds like navigating parental alienation is a constant process of learning, adapting.
It is, for sure. There's no magic formula. It's about being attuned to your child, seeking guidance when you need it, and never giving up on that relationship.
And remembering that healing, it takes time.
It's a marathon, not a sprint. There will be setbacks, there will be times when you feel frustrated, hopeless even. But with patience, with persistence, with the right support, it is possible to rebuild that trust, to reconnect with your child, to create a healthier, happier future.
That's a really powerful message, a message of hope. So for anyone out there dealing with the pain of parental alienation, please know you're not alone. There are resources, there are people who can help, and there is always hope.
Always. And don't forget to take care of yourself. Your well-being, it matters. It allows you to be strong for your child to navigate this challenging journey.
And celebrate those small victories. Every positive interaction, every moment of connection, it's a step in the right direction.
Every step forward, no matter how small, is something to celebrate. It's proof that healing is possible and that those family bonds, they're strong. They can endure even the toughest storms.
Well said. And on that note of hope and resilience, let's take a moment to shift gears and head into the final part of our deep dive. As we wrap up this deep dive into parental alienation, I keep thinking about something Pastor Williams said in his blog post about how easily this whole issue can be misunderstood, especially by people who haven't lived through it.
Oh, absolutely. It's so easy to dismiss it, right? People might think, oh, kids just go through phases or they play favorites, but this is different.
It's way more than that. It's not just normal family dynamics.
Right, it's not. Parental alienation, it's calculated, it's manipulative.
Yeah.
And the impact on both the child and the targeted parent, it can be devastating.
And that lack of understanding, it can be really harmful because people don't recognize the problem, they don't seek help, and the alienation just gets worse.
Exactly. And it's crucial to remember, it's never the child's fault.
Right.
And it's not always a reflection of something the targeted parent did. A lot of times, it comes from the alienating parent's own issues, their need for control, using the child as a pawn in their own emotional battles.
So even if the targeted parent isn't perfect, even if they've made mistakes, that doesn't justify this kind of manipulation.
No, it doesn't. Parental alienation is emotional abuse, plain and simple. And we need to stop blaming the victim and start holding the perpetrator accountable.
And recognizing that the child, they're the real victim here. They're being robbed of a loving relationship with one of their parents, and that can have lifelong consequences.
Absolutely. And that's why professional help is so critical. A therapist who understands parental alienation, they can be a lifeline for both the child and the targeted parent.
Right. For the child, it's about having that safe space to process everything, to understand it's not their fault, to develop coping skills. And for the parent, it's about getting support, learning how to navigate this incredibly difficult situation.
It's about giving them the tools to advocate for their child, to protect their child's best interests.
Because at the end of the day, that's what matters most, right? The child's well-being.
Absolutely. And while we've focused a lot on the targeted parent and the child, it's important to remember that addressing the alienating parent's behavior is part of the solution too.
So you're saying there's a role for therapy in working with them as well.
If they're willing, yes. Therapy can help them understand why they're doing this, help them address their own issues, learn healthier ways to cope, to communicate.
It's about promoting self-awareness, taking responsibility.
Exactly. Helping them see the harm they're causing and empowering them to make different choices.
So while this is a heavy topic, a complex issue, it's not hopeless. With awareness, with education, with support, families can heal. They can find a path back to each other.
I agree. And as we wrap up our deep dive today, I want to leave our listeners with this. If you think parental alienation is happening in your life or someone you know, please reach out for help. There are resources, there are people who care, and you don't have to go through this alone.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you to our expert for sharing your expertise with us today. We hope this deep dive has been informative, maybe even empowering. Remember, knowledge is power. And by shining a light on these tough issues, we can help break the cycle of pain and support families on their journey toward healing. Until next time, stay curious and keep diving deep.